Mom pressed a check for $1,900 into my palm, right in front of Dad's casket, whispering that it was my full share. My brother smirked like the deal was done, while Mom held out a waiver for me to sign. They didn't know I was carrying an envelope Dad made me promise to open only when they tried to push me out. Have you ever had your family put a price tag on your grief? My name is Taylor Martin. And I had been standing in the funeral home for exactly 45 minutes when my mother decided to put a price tag on my grief. The drive back to Maple Hollow had been a blur of gray highways and static-filled radio stations. I lived 3 states away. A deliberate geographical buffer I had placed between myself and the suffocating gravity of my family home. When I received the call about Dad, it was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a site evaluation for Northgate Project Solutions, wearing a hard hat and holding a tablet, completely unprepared for the ground to drop out from beneath me. Frank Martin was dead. Heart failure. They said. It happened so fast that by the time I processed the words, he was already gone. I drove back in a trance, expecting to find a house in mourning. I expected to find my mother, Denise, broken by the loss of her husband of 40 years. I expected my brother, Kyle, to be stepping up, perhaps overwhelmed but present. Instead, when I walked into the viewing room at the Henderson Funeral Home, I felt like I had walked into a corporate mixer that just happened to feature a casket. The room smelled of lilies and floor wax, a cloying scent that sticks to the back of your throat. Dad looked small. That was the first thing that hit me. Frank Martin had been a quiet man, a man who occupied space with a gentle, yielding silence, but in death, he looked diminished. They had dressed him in a navy suit I didn't recognize, likely something Kyle had picked out because it looked expensive, not because Dad would have liked it. Dad was a flannel and corduroy man. He hated ties. Seeing him in that stiff, silken noose made my eyes burn with a sudden, sharp onset of tears that I refused to let fall. I stood by the open casket, my hand resting on the polished mahogany rail. I was trying to say goodbye. I was trying to summon a memory of his voice, the way he sounded when he snuck away to call me late at night, whispering so Mom wouldn't hear. Taylor. The voice was soft, melodic, and entirely unwelcome. I stiffened but didn't turn immediately. I knew that tone. It was the voice Denise used when she wanted to appear maternal while actually maneuvering you into a corner. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my eyes on Dad's face. She moved in close beside me. To anyone watching from the rows of folding chairs behind us, it must have looked like a touching moment, a grieving widow comforting her daughter. She placed a hand on my forearm, her fingers squeezing just a little too tight, the sharp edge of her diamond ring digging into my skin. "He looks peaceful, doesn't he?" she whispered. "He looks like he's wearing a stranger's clothes," I replied, my voice low. "Don't start, Taylor, not today." Her tone shifted instantly, losing the warmth and gaining that familiar metallic edge. "We have a lot to get through. The service starts in 20 minutes. I finally looked at her. Denise was impeccable. Her black dress was tailored. Her hair was sprayed into an unmovable helmet of blonde perfection, and her makeup was flawless. There were no red rims around her eyes, no blotchy skin. She looked like she was running a board meeting, not burying her husband. "I'm just saying goodbye, Mom." "Good," she said. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting to the entrance where guests were signing the book, then to the corners where relatives were murmuring. Once she was satisfied that no one was within earshot, she moved her hand from my arm to my hand. She pressed something into my palm. It felt like paper, thick, crisp paper. "Take this," she murmured, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Put it in your purse, right now." I looked down. My brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing. It was a personal check. It was drawn on the joint account she shared with Dad. The handwriting was hers, looping, aggressive, and unmistakable. The amount was written out in stark blue ink, $1,900.00, $1,900. My stomach turned over. I looked at her, confused. "What is this?" "Shh," she hissed, smiling tightly at Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who was approaching the casket line. Denise angled her body to block Mrs. Gable's view of the check in my hand. That is for you. It is to cover your travel expenses and, well, everything else. Everything else? I repeated. It is your share, Taylor, she said, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to step back. Your inheritance. We wanted to make sure you got it immediately so you wouldn't have to wait for probate or deal with the courts. It is a gift, a final gift from your father and me. I looked at the check again, in the memo line, in careful, block capital letters. She had written full and final share. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I looked from the check to Dad's pale, waxy face. He was lying right there. He hadn't even been in the ground for an hour. And she was handing me a check for $1,900 and calling it my inheritance. Mom, I said, my voice shaking not with grief, but with a sudden, rising anger. Is this a joke? Dad isn't even buried yet? I am trying to be practical, she snapped, keeping her voice at a whisper. You know how expensive funerals are. You know the medical bills were high. This is what is left for you. I dug deep to give you this much. Taylor, you should be saying thank you. Then, she produced a second piece of paper. It had been folded into a tight square in her clutch. She unfolded it against the edge of the casket using my father's coffin as a desk. I just need you to sign this receipt, she said. Just for my records, so I know you received the money and we can close the books on the estate. It keeps things clean. I looked at the paper. It wasn't a receipt. It was a typed document, brief but dense with legal jargon. I caught phrases like waive all future claims and accept as total satisfaction of inheritance. You want me to sign a legal waiver? I asked, looking at her incredulously. Here now. It is just a formality, a deep voice said from behind me. I turned to see my brother, Kyle. He was wearing a suit that fit him perfectly, his hair styled, a mournful expression plastered on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stood slightly behind Mom, looming, acting as her enforcer. It was the dynamic we had lived with for 30 years. Denise gave the orders. Kyle made sure they were followed. Just sign it, Taylor, Kyle said, his voice smooth. Mom is stressed enough. Don't make this difficult. Difficult. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. She is handing me a check for $1,900 over Dad's dead body. Kyle, you don't think that's a little insane? Kyle stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. Dad didn't have anything left. Tay, the business has been struggling. The medical bills wiped them out. Mom is doing you a favor giving you anything at all. $1,900 is generous. Generous. I looked at the check again. $1,900. It was an insult. It was a slap in the face. But more than that, it was a trap. I looked around the room. I saw my aunts and uncles, Dad's old friends from the machine shop, neighbors I had grown up with. They were all watching us. They saw a mother, a son, and a daughter huddled together. They probably thought we were sharing a moment of collective heartbreak. They had no idea that a transaction was taking place. I'm not signing this, I said, folding the check, but keeping the waiver on the casket edge. And I'm not cashing this check. Denise's face hardened. The mask of the grieving widow slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. You need the money. Taylor, I know you do. Living in that city, renting that apartment, don't be proud. Take the money. It's not about the money, I said. It's about the fact that you typed up a waiver before his body was even cold. We are trying to protect the family, Denise hissed. We are trying to simplify things. Simplify things for who? I asked. Suddenly, I felt a presence at my elbow. It was Aunt Sarah, Dad's younger sister. She had approached quietly to pay her respects, and she must have heard the tail end of the conversation. Is everything all right? Aunt Sarah asked, her eyes darting between me and the piece of paper on the casket. Denise smiled instantly. It was terrifying how fast she could switch it on. Everything is fine, Sarah. Just discussing some logistics for the reception. But Aunt Sarah was looking at the check in my hand. She saw the waiver. Her brow furrowed. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. meant only for me. Wait, are they doing the estate stuff already? Frank only died on Tuesday. How did they even get the paperwork drawn up that fast? Did they talk about this before? She trailed off. Realizing the implication of her own words, I caught Kyle's eye. He wasn't looking at me. He was glaring at Aunt Sarah. "It's fine, Aunt Sarah," Kyle said, stepping between us. "Just family business. Why don't you go find a seat? Service is starting." He practically physically herded her away. I turned back to Mom. She was holding a pen out to me, a nice, heavy Mont Blanc pen. "Sign it, Taylor," she commanded. Her voice was low, dangerous. "Do not cause a scene at your father's funeral. Do you want everyone here to see you fighting with your mother? Do you want that to be Frank's memory?" "You are the one making this a transaction," I said. "I am the one holding this family together," she countered. "I have always held it together. You left. You ran away to your little job and your little life. Kyle stayed. Kyle helped. You don't get to come back here and demand things you didn't earn. Earn." I looked at Dad's face. "I'm his daughter. Being his daughter isn't a job I get paid for." $1,900, she said, ignoring me. "That is the offer, full and final. If you don't sign, you get nothing. And believe me, Taylor, I will make sure the legal fees to fight me cost you 10 times that much. Do the math." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the aggression. She was rushing. She was pushing. Why? If there was really no money, if Dad really died broke, why was she so desperate for me to sign away my rights for a measly $1,900? Why the urgency? Why the ambush? People don't try to buy you off if you have no leverage. They only try to buy you off when they are afraid of what you might find. "No," I said. I took a step back from the casket. "Taylor," Kyle warned, stepping back to my side. "Don't be stupid." I said no. Denise's hand shook with rage. "You ungrateful little—" She stopped herself, plastering a tragic expression on her face as the funeral director walked into the room to announce the start of the service. She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear. "You are going to regret this. You are going to walk away with nothing." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not signing." She snatched the waiver off the casket, crumpling it slightly in her haste to hide it in her purse before the funeral director reached us. Kyle shot me a look of pure venom, adjusted his tie, and took Mom's arm. They turned and walked toward the front row, heads bowed, playing the part of the bereaved family to perfection. I stood there for a moment longer, alone with Dad. "I see what they're doing. Dad," I whispered to him. "I see it." I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth paper of a sealed envelope. It had been there for 3 days, ever since I got the call. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't wanted to believe I would need it. It was an envelope Dad had given me 5 years ago, the last time I visited, and Mom had gone out for groceries. He had pressed it into my hand with a look of intense urgency, making me swear on my life that I would keep it sealed. "Only open this if they try to cut you out," he had said. "Only open this on the day you need to save yourself." I felt the sharp corner of the envelope against my thumb. I watched my mother and brother take their seats in the front row, accepting condolences, dabbing at dry eyes. I took a deep breath, turned away from the casket, and walked to the third row, sitting alone. I didn't sign their paper, but tomorrow, I was going to open mine. The eulogy was being delivered by Reverend Miller, a man who had known my father for 20 years but spoke about him with the generic pleasantries one reserves for a stranger. He talked about Frank Martin's quiet dedication and his love for gardening. I sat in the third row, staring at the back of my brother's neck, and thought about how accurate that was. Dad loved gardening because plants did not ask him for money. Plants did not demand he mortgage his peace of mind to fund their latest failure. Plants did not gaslight him. As the Reverend droned on about seasons of life, my mind drifted back to the house on Elm Street, to understand why my mother tried to buy me off with a check for $1,900. You have to understand the economy of the Martin household. It was never a democracy. It was a dictatorship disguised as a benevolence fund, and my mother, Denise, was the treasurer, the auditor, and the sole beneficiary. Growing up, there was a script we were all expected to follow. In Denise's world, love was not a feeling, it was a currency, and she controlled the exchange rate. If you did what she wanted, if you dressed how she liked, if you agreed that her lasagna was the best in the county, the currency flowed. If you had an independent thought, the market crashed. I learned early on that I was the diversified portfolio steady, reliable, boring. I was expected to get good grades, keep my room clean, and not require too much emotional overhead. I was the safety net. Kyle, on the other hand, was the high-risk, high-reward venture capital project, sitting there in the funeral home. I looked at Kyle's posture. He sat with his shoulders back, projecting the image of the stoic son. It was the same posture he held when he was 16 and totaled Dad's truck. I remembered that night vividly. The police lights flashing in the driveway, the smell of burnt rubber and cheap beer. I had been terrified that Dad would explode. Instead, Mom had rushed out, wrapped a blanket around Kyle's shaking shoulders, and immediately began constructing the narrative. The road was icy, she said. Even though it was mid-July, the other driver had high beams on. She insisted, even though Kyle had hit a stationary mailbox. Dad had stood by the garage, his face gray, looking at the twisted metal of the truck he used for work. He didn't say a word. He just pulled out a small spiral-bound notebook from his breast pocket and made a note. That was the thing about Dad. He was silent, but he was a chronicler. While Mom spun stories, Dad wrote down numbers. Throughout our 20s, the dynamic only calcified. Kyle went to college, dropped out, started a DJ business, failed, started a landscaping crew, failed, and then moved back into the basement to find himself every time he stumbled. Mom was there with the checkbook. She called it investing in his potential. When I pointed out that his potential seemed to be costing them their retirement savings, she called me jealous. She said I lacked family loyalty. She said I was cold. I left Maple Hollow the day after I graduated college. I didn't leave because I hated the town. I left because I couldn't breathe in a house where my reality was constantly being edited by my mother. If I said the sky was blue, Denise would argue it was actually a shade of cerulean and that I was being difficult for not seeing the nuance. It is exhausting to fight for your own perception of the world every single day. So I moved 3 states away. I built a career at Northgate Project Solutions. I became a project manager because I craved order. I craved clear objectives, budgets that balanced, and accountability. I craved a world where, if someone messed up, they owned it, rather than blaming the weather or the lighting. But leaving didn't mean I escaped. The Martin family economy has a long reach. Over the last 5 years, as Dad's heart condition worsened, the guilt began to seep in. It is a specific kind of Midwestern guilt that tastes like casserole and feels like obligation. I couldn't be there to drive him to appointments, so I tried to compensate with money. I wanted to make sure he had the best care, the best medication, the comfortable chair he needed for his swelling legs. I would send checks, $500 here, $1,000 there. "Send it to me," Mom would say over the phone, her voice dripping with that sickening sweetness. Dad gets so confused with the bank mobile app. I will make sure it gets into the right account. I will handle it. Taylor, you just focus on your big career. I knew better. Deep down, I knew better. But I sent it anyway because it was the only way I knew how to touch him from a distance. Every time I called to ask if he got the new walker I paid for, or if he liked the heated blanket, Mom would answer, or if Dad picked up, I would hear the telltale click of the extension line in the kitchen, or the sudden, hollow echo of the speakerphone being activated. "Hi, Taylor," Mom would chirp, interrupting before Dad could get a word out. "We are just sitting here having coffee. Dad loves the blanket. Don't you, Frank?" "It's nice," Dad would say, his voice sounding small and distant. "See? He loves it," she would interpret. "We are using the extra money you sent for groceries this week. Things are so expensive. You know." I never got a private audience. I never got to ask, Dad, are you okay, Dad? Where is the money actually going? I suspected it was going to Kyle. I suspected my hard-earned salary was funding Kyle's new truck payments or his latest entrepreneurial scheme, which involved selling high-end water filters that nobody wanted. But I couldn't prove it. I was the outsider. I was the one who left. In Denise's narrative, my money was penance for my absence. And now, here I was, staring at a check for $1,900. The number was insulting. Yes, but it was also specific. Denise didn't pick round numbers by accident. She calculated that 1900 wasn't an approximation of value. It was a precise calibration of what she thought it would take to make me go away, balanced against what she thought she could get away with. It was an algorithm of dismissal. I thought about the last time I actually saw Dad alone. It was 6 months ago. I had driven down for a weekend, and by some miracle, Mom had gone to get her hair done. Kyle was out networking at a local bar. Dad was sitting in his armchair in the den. The room was dim, illuminated only by the flicker of the television. He looked frail, his skin like parchment paper. He was holding that little spiral notebook, the one he had carried since I was a child. He was staring at a page, his lips moving silently as he calculated sums. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He looked frightened. He closed the notebook quickly and shoved it under the cushion of his chair. "Taylor," he had wheezed, "you're here." I sat on the ottoman in front of him and took his hands. They were cold and rough, the hands of a man who had worked manual labor for 40 years but had nothing to show for it. "Dad," I had whispered, "is everything okay? Do you need anything?" He leaned forward, his eyes darting to the doorway to make sure we were truly alone. The silence of the house felt heavy, pressing in on us. "She moves things," he said. His voice was barely audible. "She moves the numbers." "Who, Mom?" He nodded. "And the boy. They think I don't see. They think I'm just an old furniture piece in the corner." "See what, Dad?" He gripped my hand, his strength surprising me. "If something happens to me—" He stopped, coughing, a dry, rattling cough that shook his thin frame. "If something happens, Taylor, listen to me. If she hands you money, if she tries to give you a check right away, don't take it." I had frowned, confused. "Why would she give me a check?" "Because that is how she closes the deal," he said, his eyes intense and lucid. "She will try to make you sign. She will say it is your share. She will say it is fair. Do not sign, Taylor. Do not take the quick money." "Dad, you are scaring me. What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, we heard the garage door rumble open. Mom was home. Dad immediately slumped back into his chair, the intensity vanishing from his eyes, replaced by the vacant look he wore whenever she was in the room. He became the furniture again. "Just promise me," he whispered, looking at the TV screen as if he were discussing the weather. "Wait for the real paper." Mom had bustled in a moment later, commenting on my hair and complaining about the traffic, and the moment was gone. I had dismissed it at the time as the paranoia of a sick man, or maybe the confusion of the medication. But sitting in that funeral home pew, with the weight of the check still phantom heavy in my pocket, the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. That is how she closes the deal. Dad knew. He knew exactly what she would do. He had predicted the check, the timing, the pressure. He knew because he had watched her operate for 40 years. He knew her playbook better than anyone. The $1,900 wasn't an inheritance. It was a severance package. It was a termination fee. Denise was firing me from the family. She wanted me to cash that check and sign that waiver because she knew that once I did, I would have no legal standing to ask questions. I would be a paid-off creditor. I would be done. And whatever was actually left in the estate, whatever secrets were hidden in the house, in the accounts, in the LLC that Kyle was supposedly managing, would remain buried with Frank Martin. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from a cold, hard realization. My mother didn't just want to keep the money. She wanted to erase my claim to my father's life. She wanted to rewrite history so that Kyle and she were the only ones who mattered, and I was just a distant relative who was paid off for her trouble. I touched the pocket where Dad's envelope sat, the one he told me to bring, the one he said would save me. I realized then that Dad hadn't just been writing in his notebook all those years. He had been preparing. He had been building a defense for the daughter he couldn't protect while he was alive. The Reverend finally stopped talking. The organist began a mournful, wheezing rendition of Amazing Grace. Everyone stood up. I stood up too. I looked across the aisle at my mother. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking for all the world like a saint in black crepe. She caught my eye and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Glancing pointedly at my purse, she was checking to see if the deal was closed. She was checking to see if I was a good investment. I didn't nod back. I stared right through her. You taught me that everything is a transaction. Mom, I thought, you taught me that love is conditional and loyalty has a price tag. You think $1,900 is the price of my silence? You think you can liquidate me like a bad asset. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and floor wax one last time. The service was over. But the audit was just beginning. The reception was held at a local community hall, a drafty building that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. While the other mourners balanced paper plates of potato salad and ham rolls, I found myself retreating into my own head, replaying the last few months of Dad's life like a grainy film reel, looking for the frames I had missed. It started about 2 months ago. It was a Tuesday. Late, maybe 11 at night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me out of a light sleep. Seeing Dad on the caller ID at that hour was so rare it made my heart hammer against my ribs. Dad didn't make late-night calls. Dad didn't really make calls at all unless Mom handed him the phone. Taylor. His voice had been thin, sounding like dry leaves scraping together. Dad, is everything okay? Did you fall? I sat up, already mentally calculating how fast I could drive to Maple Hollow. No, I'm fine. Listen to me. He paused, and I heard a sharp intake of breath. Do you still have the number for Elliot Baines, the lawyer? I blinked, confused. Elliot Baines was a name I hadn't heard in years. He was a small-town attorney who had handled the closing on my parents' house decades ago. A man Dad used to complain about because he charged too much for photocopies. Dad hated lawyers. He hated contracts. He believed a handshake should be enough. A philosophy that had cost him dearly over the years. Mr. Baines, I think so. Or I can find it. Why are you suing someone? I tried to keep my tone light, but the air in my bedroom felt suddenly heavy. Just find it, Dad said, his urgency cutting through the static. Keep it safe. Don't tell your mother. Dad, what's going on? They are trying to make me sign things. Taylor, the deed, the business license. They keep putting papers in front of me when I'm tired. Who is they? I asked, though I knew the answer. Just keep the number. In case you need to call him, in case I can't talk. Suddenly, the tone on the other end changed. I heard a door creak open in the background, followed by the familiar, overly cheerful voice of my mother. Frank, who are you talking to at this hour? You need your rest. Just checking the weather report. Denise, Dad said, his voice instantly flattening into that submissive monotone. Go back to sleep. The line clicked dead. At the time, I had brushed it off. I told myself it was the medication talking, or maybe just old-age paranoia. I didn't want to believe that my mother and brother were actively circling him like vultures while he was still breathing. I chose the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. Then there was the letter. About 3 weeks after that call, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was addressed in Dad's shaky, spiderweb handwriting. But before I could even open it, my phone rang. It was Mom. Did you get a letter from your father today? She asked, not even bothering with a hello. I just took it out of the mailbox. Mom, how did you know? Oh, he is just so confused lately, she sighed. A sound that was meant to elicit sympathy but only made my skin crawl. He has been writing letters to everyone. The mailman, the president, you. Just rambling nonsense about the house and money. The doctor says it is part of the decline. Just toss it. Honey, don't upset yourself. I looked at the envelope in my hand. He seemed lucid on the phone a few weeks ago. That's how it goes, she said, her voice tightening. Good days and bad days, mostly bad now. He thinks people are stealing from him. It is very common with his condition. Just don't read too much into it. I didn't toss it. I put it in a drawer, unopened, telling myself I would deal with it when work calmed down. I let her voice overwrite his. I let her narrative win because it was easier than confronting the reality that my father was reaching out for a lifeline I wasn't throwing. Standing in the community hall, watching my mother work the room, I felt a wave of nausea. Denise was not grieving. She was networking. She was moving from group to group with a frenetic energy that didn't match the occasion. She wasn't accepting condolences. She was managing information. I watched her corner Uncle Bob near the punch bowl. She was talking fast, her hand on his arm, her eyes intense. Then she moved to Mrs. Higgins, the town gossip, whispering, nodding, checking her watch. It wasn't the behavior of a widow. It was the behavior of a project manager trying to meet a deadline before the market closed. She was on her phone constantly, stepping into the hallway to take calls, her voice dropping to a hiss whenever anyone walked by. She's nervous, a voice rumbled beside me. I jumped. It was Mr. Henderson, not the funeral director, but Gus Henderson, the old mechanic who had run the auto shop down the street from our house for 30 years. Gus was Dad's oldest friend. He was a man of few words, covered permanently in a layer of grease and motor oil, though today he had scrubbed up into a suit that looked 2 sizes too small. "Hi, Mr. Henderson," I said. "Thank you for coming." "Gus?" he corrected. He didn't look at me. He was staring at my mother across the room. "Frank was a good man. Too good for this circus." "I know," I said softly. Gus took a sip of his lukewarm coffee and grimaced. Then, he shifted his bulk so that he was blocking me from the rest of the room. He created a wall between me and my family. "Frank came to see me," Gus said, his voice low and gravelly, "about a week before he passed. Drove himself down to the shop. He shouldn't have been driving. Looked like a ghost behind the wheel. He drove. I was shocked. Mom had said he was bedridden for the last month. Yeah, he had something he wanted me to keep. Said he couldn't keep it in the house. Said she goes through his pockets while he sleeps." Gus spat the words out with a mixture of disgust and sadness. He reached into his jacket pocket. His large, calloused hand emerged with something small wrapped in a blue shop rag. He pressed it into my hand. He said, "If I die, and if things get ugly, you find Taylor, you give this to her. Don't give it to Denise. Don't give it to the boy. Just Taylor." I unfolded the rag. Inside was a small, silver key. It wasn't a house key. It was smaller, flat, with a number stamped on it. Next to it was a scrap of paper torn from a spiral notebook, Dad's notebook. On the paper, in that familiar shaky scrawl, were just 2 things. B. Vault my heart stopped. E.B. Elliot Baines. "He told me you'd know what to do," Gus said. He looked at me, his eyes watery. He was scared. Taylor. Frank wasn't scared of dying. He was scared of them. He was scared of what they'd do to his name after he was gone. I closed my hand around the key. The metal bit into my palm, grounding me. "Thank you, Gus," I whispered. "Thank you for listening to him." "You go," Gus said, nodding toward the exit. "She's watching you. I'll distract her." I looked up. Denise was scanning the room, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Gus and me. She started to move toward us, her smile fixed and predatory. "Well, look who it is," she called out, her voice shrill. "Gus, I didn't think you owned a tie." "I'm leaving. Mom," I said, stepping out from behind Gus. "I need some air. I'm going back to the hotel." "Already?" She stopped, her eyes flicking to my closed hand. "But we haven't cut the cake, and Kyle wanted to talk to you about the arrangements." "I have a migraine," I lied. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Taylor," she said, her voice dropping that octave into warning territory. Don't run off. We have things to settle. Tomorrow, I repeated firmly. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from pavement. I got into my rental car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I didn't go to the hotel. I pulled up the GPS on my phone. Elliot Baines, attorney at law, 14 Maple Avenue. It was 3:45 in the afternoon. If I hurried, I could catch him before he closed. As I drove through the familiar streets of Maple Hollow, the pieces started clicking together. The late-night phone call, the intercepted letter, the waiver at the funeral home, the $1,900. Dad hadn't been confused. He hadn't been paranoid. He had been a prisoner in his own home, watching his wife and son dismantle his legacy piece by piece. He had been trying to smuggle the truth out to me, and I had been too busy, too distant, too willing to accept the easy narrative to see it. But he hadn't given up. Even when I failed to pick up the clues, he had made a contingency plan. He had trusted Gus. He had hidden the key. I thought about the vault note. Dad didn't have a vault. We didn't have money for vaults. Unless vault didn't mean a bank vault, unless it meant something else. I pulled up to a small brick building on Maple Avenue. It looked more like a dentist's office than a law firm. A faded sign swung gently in the breeze. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I checked my pocket. The check for $1,900 was still there. The waiver my mother wanted me to sign was burned into my memory, and now, the small silver key sat next to the check, cold and heavy. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was investigating. I was stepping into the role Dad had prepared me for, even if I hadn't known I was auditioning. I got out of the car, smoothed my black dress, and walked to the door. The sign said, "Open." I pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead. A receptionist looked up from a computer. Startled. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to see Elliot Baines." I said, "My name is Taylor Martin, Frank Martin's daughter." The receptionist's eyes went wide. She didn't check a schedule. She didn't ask if I had an appointment. She just picked up her phone and pressed a button. Her voice hushed and urgent. "Mr. Baines, she's here." She looked at me. "Go right back. He's been waiting for you." He had been waiting. Dad knew I would come. It took his death to wake me up. But I was finally here. And I was done being the daughter who signed where she was told. I was ready to read the fine print. The sky over Maple Hollow had turned a bruised shade of purple by the time I pulled my rental car into the parking lot of the Motel 6 on the edge of town. My head was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache, the kind that starts behind the eyes and drills backward into the skull. I had just come from Elliot Baines's office, and my purse felt heavier than it ever had before, weighed down not by metal, but by paper. I turned off the ignition and sat in the silence for a moment, watching the neon vacancy sign flicker. I hadn't cried yet, not really. I hadn't had the luxury. Grief requires safety, a moment of stillness where you can let the walls down. And since I arrived in this town, I had been in a defensive crouch. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. "You are a hard woman to find, Taylor." The voice came from the shadows near the ice machine. My stomach dropped. A black SUV idled there, its engine purring softly. The headlights cut, but the parking lights casting an amber glow on the woman standing beside it. It was Denise, and leaning against the hood, arms crossed over his chest, was Kyle. They had been waiting for me. They knew where I was staying. Of course they did. In a town like Maple Hollow, privacy is just a rumor. "I wasn't hiding, Mom," I said, locking my car with a chirp that sounded too loud in the quiet evening. "I was running errands." "Errands," Kyle scoffed. He pushed himself off the hood and walked toward me. He had loosened his tie, and he looked less like a grieving son and more like a bouncer at a club I didn't want to enter. "Dad's been dead 3 days, and you are running errands. We have been calling you for 2 hours." "I turned my phone off," I said, keeping my voice level. I needed space. We don't have time for space, Denise said. She marched over to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. She was still in her funeral dress, but she had touched up her lipstick. It was a bright, violent shade of red. We have business to settle. You ran out of the reception before we could finish. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out the same piece of paper she had tried to force on me at the funeral home. The edges were slightly crumpled now. Sign it, she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Right here. I have a pen. Let's get this done so we can all go to sleep. Mom, I am not signing anything tonight, I said, stepping back. I am tired. I just want to go to my room. It takes 10 seconds. Taylor, she snapped, thrusting the paper toward my chest. Why are you being so difficult? It is $1,900. Do you know how hard I had to work to scrape that together for you? That is cash, liquid, yours. You can take it and go back to your city and your job and forget all this mess. Scrape it together from where? I asked. Dad had life insurance. Dad had the business accounts. Why are you acting like he died a pauper? Because there is nothing left, Denise shouted, her voice echoing off the motel walls. She lowered her volume quickly, looking around to see if any truckers were watching. The medical bills. Taylor, you weren't here. You didn't see the bills, the dialysis, the home care, the prescriptions. It drained us. Dry. This $1,900, this is the bottom of the barrel. I am giving you the last drops because I am your mother, and I am trying to be fair. Fair. I looked at Kyle. Is Kyle getting $1,900? Kyle laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. I am getting the debt. Taylor, that is what I'm getting. I am getting the house that needs a new roof and the business that is barely breaking even. You think this is a prize? I'm doing the cleanup work, like always. He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath from the reception. You have some nerve, Kyle spat. You show up here in your fancy rental car with your designer shoes, looking down your nose at us. Where were you when Dad fell in the bathroom last month? Where were you when we had to change his sheets? You were sending checks. Easy money. You think throwing a few grand at us makes you a daughter? It makes you a bank, Taylor. And banks don't get to grieve. Banks just close accounts. The words hit their mark. They were designed to... It was the weaponization of my own guilt, the very thing I had beaten myself up over for years. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes hot, angry tears. I offered to hire a nurse, I said, my voice shaking. You told me no. You said you could handle it. We did handle it, Denise interjected, stepping between us, playing the peacemaker but tightening the net. We handled everything, and now we are handling the estate. Look, Taylor, her voice softened, becoming cloying and sweet. Come sit in the car. It is cold out here. Come sit in the warm car with me and Kyle. We can talk. I can explain the numbers to you. I have the ledger in the glove box. You just need to see the reality. She reached for my arm, her fingers hooking into my elbow, pulling me toward the black SUV. The back door was open. The interior was dark. A warning bell rang in my head. Don't get in the car. It was primal. It was the instinct of a prey animal sensing the trap. No, I said, yanking my arm back. Taylor, Denise said, her grip tightening before she let go. Don't be childish. I am not getting in the car, and I am not signing your waiver, I said. I read the header. Mom, I saw it before you snatched it back at the funeral home. It says, waiver of beneficiary rights and quit claim. It's not a receipt. It's a legal document stripping me of my status as an heir. Denise's face went rigid. The sweetness evaporated. It is standard procedure, she hissed. It simplifies the probate. If you don't sign it, the state freezes everything. The house, the accounts, everything. I won't be able to pay the electric bill. Do you want that? Do you want your mother sitting in the dark because you are too stubborn to take $1,900? If it simplifies things, why the rush? I asked. Why today? Why at the funeral? Because I know you. Denise exploded. I know you would come here and start asking questions and trying to dig into things you don't understand. You always do this. You think you are smarter than us. You think because you went to college and got a degree that you know better than the people who actually lived here. I am not signing, I repeated. Not until I see the will. The air in the parking lot changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kyle stopped shifting his weight. Denise went perfectly still. There is no will, Kyle said. His voice was too flat, too rehearsed. Dad didn't have a will, Denise confirmed, nodding. He didn't believe in them. He thought they were bad luck. That is why we have to do it this way. Taylor, intestate succession is a nightmare. This waiver allows me to act as administrator without a bond. It is for the family. Liar, I said. It was the first time in 35 years I had called my mother a liar to her face. Denise recoiled as if I had slapped her. Excuse me? Dad had a will. I said. I didn't tell them I had seen it. I didn't tell them about the key in my pocket or the conversation with Elliot Baines. I just held my ground. He was a meticulous man. Mom, he wrote down every tank of gas he ever bought. You really think he didn't write down who gets the house? He was sick, Denise yelled. His mind was going, whatever he wrote, whatever scraps of paper you think exist, they are invalid. He wasn't in his right mind. He seemed pretty clear to me when he called me 2 months ago, I said. Denise stepped closer, her face inches from mine. I could see the lines of powder settling into the wrinkles around her mouth. She dropped all pretense of maternal concern. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, she snarled, her voice a low growl. You are playing a dangerous game. You are an outsider here. You have no allies. If you drag this into court, if you refuse to sign, I will make sure you lose everything. I will countersue you for back expenses. I will bill the estate for every hour I spent nursing him. I will make sure the legal fees eat up every single dime, and you walk away with zero. Or yeah, you can take the $1,900, sign the paper, and go home. Is that a threat? I asked. It is a promise, she said. Dad isn't here to save you, Taylor. It is just us, and you are outnumbered. Dad would be ashamed of you, I said softly. Dad. Kyle laughed again, stepping up beside Mom. Dad was a weak man who couldn't make a decision to save his life. Mom ran this family. Mom kept the lights on. Dad just sat in his chair and watched. Don't pretend he was some kind of hero. He was a passenger. And so are you. If Dad wanted me to sign this, I said, looking from Kyle to Mom, he would have told me himself. He wouldn't have needed you to ambush me in a parking lot. He is dead, Denise screamed. She was losing control now, her hands balling into fists. He is dead, and he doesn't get a vote anymore. I am the one who is alive. I am the one who has to pay the mortgage. She took a breath, composing herself with terrifying speed. She held the paper out one last time. Last chance. Taylor, sign it. Be a good daughter. Don't destroy this family over money. I looked at the paper. It fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. I looked at the check stapled to the top of it. Full and final share. I thought about the document I had just read in Elliot Baines's office. I thought about the dates. I thought about the betrayal that went deeper than money. The betrayal of trust and agency. I am not destroying the family, I said. You did that when you printed that check. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the motel room door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. You walk away now, and the deal is off, Kyle shouted after me. You get nothing, you hear me, nothing. Give me the paper. Kyle, Denise snapped. She will sign. She will break. She always breaks. I reached my door and jammed the key card into the slot. The light blinked green. I pushed the door open. Taylor, Denise called out, her voice desperate now. Do not close that door. I turned back to them one last time. They were standing under the amber parking light, looking small and mean and terrified. They looked like people who had built a house on sand and just felt the first vibration of an earthquake. You said this was my one chance, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the asphalt. You said the offer expires. It does, Kyle said, sneering. Good, I said, because I don't want your $1,900. You will be back, Denise yelled. You will come begging. No, Mom, I said. I won't. I looked her dead in the eye. Tomorrow, I said. I am going to bring what Dad really left, and I suggest you bring a lawyer. I stepped into the room and slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. I hooked the chain. Then, and only then, did I slide down the wall to the cheap carpet, pull my knees to my chest, and finally let myself cry. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage. And tomorrow, I was going to use them. The office of Elliot Baines smelled of lemon oil and old dust, a scent that felt distinctly removed from the 21st century. It was a small room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, each shelf groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that seemed to slow time down, forcing me to breathe. I sat in a wingback chair that was slightly too large for me, my hands gripping the cold leather armrests. Across the heavy oak desk sat Elliot Baines. He was a man in his late 60s, with silver hair combed severely back and eyes that were sharp, blue, and unblinking behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look like the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances. He looked like the kind of lawyer who buried secrets. Your father paid my retainer in cash 3 years ago, Elliot said, his voice dry and precise. He came in here every 6 months to top it up. He gave me strict instructions that I was to speak to no one but you, and only after he had passed. He folded his hands on the desk. He was very specific. Taylor, he said, when the time comes, my daughter will walk through that door, and she will likely look like she has been through a war. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That sounds about right. He also said you would have a key, Elliot said. Extending his hand palm up, I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the check for $1,900, the paper now soft and worn from being clenched in my fist. I bypassed it and pulled out the small silver key Gus had given me. I placed it in Elliot's hand. He nodded, as if I had just passed a test. He stood up, walked to a large painting of a hunting scene on the wall, and swung it open on hidden hinges. Behind it was a steel wall safe. He inserted the key, dialed a combination, and pulled the heavy door open. He removed a single, thick manila envelope. He brought it back to the desk and placed it in front of me. This, Elliot said, is the last will and testament of Frank Martin, the original, the only one he signed in this office, and most importantly, the only one he signed when I could medically and legally certify he was of sound mind. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. I undid the string tie and slid the documents out. The paper was heavy, bond quality. I turned to the last page first. There it was, my father's signature. It was firm, not the shaky scrawl I had seen on his recent medical forms. It was the signature of the man who had raised me, the man who built bookshelves and fixed cars. The ink was blue, a specific choice lawyers use to distinguish originals from copies. A wet signature. Read the first paragraph of Article 3, Elliot instructed. I flipped back to the first page. I read the legal jargon, my eyes scanning until they hit the words he wanted me to see. I hereby appoint my daughter, Taylor Martin, as the sole executor of this, my last will and testament. In the event that Taylor Martin is unable or unwilling to serve, I appoint the First National Bank as alternate executor. I looked up at Elliot, stunned. Me sole executor. But Mom said she was the administrator. She said it was automatic because she's his wife. She is his wife, Elliot said calmly, but she is not his executor. Frank was very clear on that point. He did not trust Denise to carry out his wishes. He knew she would prioritize herself and your brother. Keep reading, he said. Article 5. I turned the page. I give, devise, and bequeath my entire interest in Martin Holdings, LLC, including all assets, accounts, and intellectual property held therein, to my daughter, Taylor Martin. I frowned. Martin Holdings, that's the family LLC. Mom always told me it was a shell. She said it was just where they put the debt from Kyle's failed businesses. She said it was worthless. Elliot's eyes twinkled for the first time. Did she? That is interesting, because according to the deeds filed in that LLC, it owns the house on Elm Street. It owns the land the auto shop sits on, which Frank bought from Gus 10 years ago and leased back to him. And it holds a diversified investment portfolio that Frank built quietly over 20 years. My mouth fell open. The house, the shop investments. But Mom said they were broke. She said the medical bills wiped them out. The medical bills were paid from a separate joint account, Elliot explained. Frank was very careful. He kept the LLC completely separate. He lived simply so that the LLC would grow. He told me he wanted to leave you something that couldn't be spent on a new truck or a gambling debt. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. The house, the land, the savings. It wasn't just $1,900. It was everything. Dad hadn't died broke. He had died hiding his wealth from the people living in his house. There is one more clause you need to see, Elliot said. Article 9. I call it the poison pill. I looked at the text. If any beneficiary under this will contests its validity, or attempts to coerce the executor into altering the distribution of assets, or presents any document purporting to be a waiver of rights signed by the executor prior to the probate of this will, such beneficiary shall forfeit their entire share and be treated as if they had predeceased me. I read it twice. The air left my lungs. Presents any document purporting to be a waiver of rights, he knew, I whispered. He knew about the waiver. Frank predicted it almost to the letter, Elliot said. He told me Denise will try to buy her out cheap. She will try to get her to sign something before she sees the will. That creates a presumption of fraud. Taylor, if you had signed that paper she gave you and accepted that check, this clause would have allowed us to void it immediately. But the fact that they tried that is ammunition. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why did he have to do it this way? Why all the secrets? Elliot reached into the envelope again. He wanted to tell you himself, but he couldn't. He handed me a smaller white envelope, on the front, in Dad's handwriting. It said, for Taylor. Read this when I'm gone. I took it. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. I tore open the flap. My dearest Taylor, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. Not that I have died, we all do that, but that your mother and brother have done exactly what I feared they would. I am sorry I could not be stronger for you. I know you wondered why I stayed, why I let her control everything. The truth is, I was tired. Taylor, fighting Denise is like fighting the tide. It just wears you down until you drown. For the last few years, the only way I could keep peace in the house was to play the fool. I let them think I was confused. I let them think I was blind. But I saw everything. I saw Kyle taking money from the cash drawer. I saw Denise moving funds to her private account. 2 months ago, they brought a notary to the house while I was on my pain medication. They tried to make me sign the house over to Kyle. They told me it was an insurance form. I refused. That was the night I called you. They are angry. Taylor, they feel entitled to what I built, but they did not build it. You were the one who sent money. You were the one who offered to pay for nurses. You were the one who loved me without asking for a receipt. The check they gave you, I assume it was for $1,900. That is the balance of the old savings account I closed 5 years ago. Denise thinks that is all there is. She doesn't know about the LLC. She thinks she is smart, but she never looked at the paperwork. Do not let them bully you. You are the only one who can stop them. I am leaving you the tools. Please, forgive an old man for his cowardice, and use your strength to make it right. Love. Dad. I lowered the letter. The tears that had been threatening to fall in the motel room were gone. In their place was a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked at the check in my pocket again. $1,900. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a bribe. It was a trap designed to make me settle for pennies so they could keep the fortune they didn't know I controlled. They tried to make me sign last night, I said, my voice steady. In the motel parking lot, they threatened to sue me. They said there was no will. Elliot nodded slowly. They are desperate, and desperation makes people careless. I looked at the legal documents spread out on the desk, the wet signature, the LLC transfer, the poison pill. Dad hadn't just left me money, he had left me a loaded gun. So what do we do? I asked. Do we file this? We do, Elliot said, but there is a complication you need to know about. He paused, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked suddenly tired. I checked the county court filings this morning, just before you arrived, he said. It seems Denise was very busy yesterday. My stomach tightened. What did she do? At 9 o'clock this morning, the moment the clerk's office opened, Denise filed a petition for probate, Elliot said quietly. She submitted a document purporting to be Frank's last will and testament. But you have the will, I said, pointing to the desk. I have the real will, Elliot corrected. The will Denise filed is dated 3 weeks ago. It names her as sole beneficiary and Kyle as executor. It completely disinherits you. But Dad said he refused to sign, I exclaimed. He said in the letter they tried to make him sign, and he refused. Exactly, Elliot said. He put his glasses back on, and the sharp, dangerous look returned to his eyes. If Frank refused to sign it, and if Frank was medically incapacitated, then the document Denise filed this morning is not just invalid. He leaned forward. It is a forgery, and in the state of Ohio, filing a forged will is a felony. I sat there, the weight of his words settling over me. They hadn't just tried to cheat me, they had crossed the line into criminal activity. They were so sure I would take the $1,900 and run, so sure I was the weak, obedient daughter, that they had walked right into a trap of their own making. She thinks she has won, I said softly. She thinks because she filed first. She controls the narrative. Possession is 9/10 of the law, Elliot said. But the truth is the other 1/10, and we have the truth in writing. He stood up and began gathering the papers. We have a 72-hour window to contest her filing before the judge grants her temporary powers, Elliot said, his voice clipped and professional. We are going to file this will within the hour, but Taylor, you need to be prepared. Once we do this, there is no going back. It will be war. I stood up. I felt taller than I had when I walked in. I touched the letter in my pocket, feeling the reassuring crinkle of the paper. She declared war at the funeral. Elliot, I said, I'm just finally fighting back. Good, Elliot said. He handed me a business card. Go back to the house. Do not engage with them. Just get your things. But keep your eyes open. If they truly forged that will, there will be evidence. We need to find it before they destroy it. I know where to look, I said, thinking of the spiral notebook Dad had mentioned. I know exactly where to look. I walked out of the office and into the blinding afternoon sun. The world looked different now. The colors were sharper. The noise of the street was clearer. I wasn't Taylor the victim anymore. I was Taylor Martin, executor of the estate, and I had a job to do. The clock on the dashboard of my rental car read 4:17 in the afternoon. In the legal world, time is usually measured in billable hours, but for me, it was now measured in minutes. We were in a sprint. Elliot Baines had explained the situation with the cold precision of a surgeon. Probate court operated on a first-come, first-served basis regarding the assumption of validity. Because Denise had filed her petition at 9 o'clock that morning, the court clerk had already stamped it. The judge hadn't signed the order granting her letters of authority, yet that usually took 24 to 48 hours, but the paperwork was in the system. If the judge signed Denise's order before we filed our contest, she would legally become the administrator. She could drain the bank accounts, sell the stocks, and list the house, and I would have to spend years and tens of thousands of dollars trying to undo it. We need to file a caveat, Elliot had said. his fingers flying across his keyboard. It is a formal notice that prevents the probate of a will without notice to us, and we need to file a temporary restraining order to freeze the assets. We have to stop the bleeding before it starts. I sat in the passenger seat of Elliot's town car as his paralegal drove us to the county courthouse. My phone, which I had turned back on, was vibrating against my leg like a panicked heartbeat. I looked down. It wasn't just one message, it was a deluge. Aunt Sarah Taylor, your mother just called me in tears. She says you are threatening to sue the family at a time like this. Cousin Mike heard you're trying to take the house. Frank would be sick if he saw this. Even Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, your poor mother is beside herself. Please, Taylor, just go home. Let them grieve. Denise wasn't wasting time. While Elliot was fighting the legal war, she was launching a PR campaign. She was painting a masterpiece of a narrative, the grieving widow versus the estranged, greedy daughter who swooped in from the big city to pick the carcass clean. She didn't mention the $1,900. She didn't mention the waiver. She only mentioned that I was causing trouble. Then, a text from a number I didn't have saved. But I recognized the area code. It was Kyle. Take $5,000. I can get it to you tonight. Cash. Just get in your car and drive. This is the best offer you are going to get. I stared at the screen. $5,000. An hour ago. They were destitute. An hour ago. 1,900 was the bottom of the barrel. Now, suddenly, the pot had sweetened by more than double. Kyle wasn't negotiating. He was panicking. They knew I hadn't signed, and they knew I had gone to a lawyer, even if they didn't know which one. We are here, Elliot said. We marched into the courthouse. I watched as Elliot navigated the clerks with the familiarity of a man who had spent 40 years in these hallways. He bypassed the line, spoke in low tones to the head clerk, and slid our thick file across the counter. I held my breath as the clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a heavy stamp, looked from Elliot's paperwork to the computer screen. She frowned. She typed something. She picked up the phone. There is already a filing for this decedent, she said. We are aware, Elliot said, his voice smooth but firm. We are contesting that filing based on the discovery of a subsequent, valid will. We are also filing an emergency motion to freeze assets due to potential dissipation. The clerk hesitated. The stamp hovered in the air. Stamp it, please, Elliot said. Time is of the essence. She brought the stamp down. Clunk. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was done. The challenge was logged. The judge would see 2 wills on his desk tomorrow morning. Denise's forgery and Dad's original. Now, Elliot said, turning to me as we walked out. We wait for the judge, but in the meantime, you need to secure the physical property. If the house belongs to the LLC, and you are the owner of the LLC, you have every right to be on that premises. And more importantly, you need to make sure they don't destroy any records. They are staying in the house, Elliot, I said. It's where they live. It is where they live, he agreed. But it is your house. Go there. Document everything. Do not use force, but do not let them bully you. If they try to stop you, call the police. We need a paper trail of their hostility. I drove my rental car straight to Elm Street. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn Dad used to mow with such precision. The grass was already getting long. It looked neglected. I walked up the driveway, keys in hand, my old house key that had been on my ring for 15 years. I marched up to the front door, ready to walk in and demand they step away from Dad's filing cabinet. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't go in. I pushed harder. The key stopped halfway. I looked closely at the hardware. The brass was shiny, unblemished. It was brand new. They had changed the locks. You have got to be kidding me, I muttered. I went to the back door, locked, changed. The garage keypad I punched in the code Dad had used since 1998. The light blinked red. Changed. They had fortified the castle. I walked back around to the front yard just as the front door opened. Denise stepped out onto the porch. She wasn't wearing her funeral blacks anymore. She was wearing a bathrobe, holding a cup of tea. looking down at me like the lady of the manor dealing with a solicitor. "You can't come in, Taylor," she said calmly. "This is my house." "Mom," I said, standing on the bottom step. "Open the door." "It is not your house," she said, taking a sip of tea. "It is my house. I am the widow, and you are trespassing. If you don't leave, I will call the sheriff." "You changed the locks," I said. "Dad hasn't even been buried 24 hours, and you changed the locks." "I had to," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "I didn't feel safe. I knew you were in a volatile state. I had to protect the property." "Protect it from who? The owner?" "Go away, Taylor. Go back to the motel. We can talk when you are calm." She started to close the door. "I am calling the police," I said. She froze. She looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. "You wouldn't dare. You want the neighbors to see squad cars in the driveway the day after the funeral." "You made this public when you locked me out," I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency number. I made sure to put it on speaker so she could hear the ring. 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. A young officer, Officer Miller, stepped out. He looked about 12 years old and completely out of his depth. "What seems to be the problem, folks?" he asked, adjusting his belt. "My daughter is harassing me," Denise said immediately, stepping down from the porch, playing the frail victim card. "She is demanding to come into my home. My husband just died. Officer, I am grieving. I just want peace." "I am not harassing her," I said, keeping my voice level, channeling Elliot Baines. "I am the executor of Frank Martin's estate. This house is owned by an LLC, of which I am the sole member. I have personal property inside, and I have a right to enter." Officer Miller looked between us. He clearly wanted to be anywhere else. "Ma'am," he said to me, "if you don't live here," and she does. "I have the deed," I lied. Well, I didn't have the deed on me, but I knew where it was. "And I have the will establishing my ownership." "A will isn't a court order until a judge signs it," the officer said, showing a surprising amount of legal knowledge. "This sounds like a civil dispute. I can't force her to let you in." "She has my property," I said, "my birth certificate, my social security card, and my father's personal effects which were left to me. If she denies me access, she is withholding property. I would like to file a report." "Fine," Denise snapped. "You want your junk. Come get it, but you are not staying, and the officer watches you the whole time." "That works for me," I said. The officer nodded. "I will stand by to keep the peace. 5 minutes, ladies." Denise unlocked the door with a defiant glare. I stepped into the house. It smelled of bleach and something burning. I walked straight past the living room and into the den, Dad's office. It was a disaster zone. Papers were strewn everywhere. The filing cabinet drawers were pulled out and hanging open. The shredder in the corner was full, a mountain of cross-cut confetti spilling out of the bin. "What did you do?" I asked, horrified. "I was cleaning," Denise said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Frank was a hoarder. I am getting rid of the trash." "You are destroying evidence," I said. I moved to the desk. The drawers were empty. The ledger was gone. The laptop was gone. "Where is the blue binder?" I asked. Dad always kept the LLC papers in a blue binder. "I don't know what you are talking about," Denise said. "Maybe I threw it out. Maybe Kyle took it to the dump." I felt a surge of panic. If they had shredded the original deed, or the banking records, we could get copies from the bank. Yes, but it would take weeks. We needed to know what they had done today. I looked around the room, desperate. My eyes landed on the bookshelf. Dad had rows of old encyclopedias. And tucked between M and N was a small, scent spiral notebook, not the one he carried in his pocket, a different one. I lunged for it. "Hey," Denise shouted. "That is mine." "It's Dad's," I said, grabbing it. "Put it down." She stepped forward to grab my arm. "Officer," I yelled. Officer Miller stepped into the room. "All right, let's calm down. You got what you came for." I clutched the notebook to my chest. Yes. Then let's go, the officer said. That belongs to the house, Denise screeched. She is stealing. It's a $2 notebook. Mom, I said, backing out of the room. Sue me. I will, she screamed. I signed the papers for this house. It is mine. I signed the transfer yesterday. I froze in the hallway. The officer stopped too. You signed the transfer? I asked slowly. Yesterday. Yes, she shouted, her face flushed with anger and adrenaline. I signed the deed transfer to the trust, so you can't touch it. I looked at her. She didn't realize what she had just admitted. You can't sign a deed transfer for a dead man. Mom, I said quietly. Unless you forged his signature, or unless you claim to have power of attorney, but power of attorney dies with the person. Her eyes went wide. She realized she had said too much in front of a cop. I meant I signed as the wife, she stammered. As the survivor. But the house isn't in his name, I said. It's in the LLC. And you aren't in the LLC. I looked at Officer Miller. You heard that? Right? She admitted to signing a transfer document yesterday, after the date of death. Officer Miller pulled out his own notepad. I heard she said she signed papers. Get out, Denise screamed, pointing at the door. Get off my property. I walked out. I had the notebook, and I had a verbal confession of a post-mortem transaction. I sat in my car in the driveway, my heart racing. I watched Officer Miller drive away. I watched Denise slam the front door and heard the new deadbolt slide home. I turned on the dome light and opened the red notebook. It wasn't a ledger. It was a log of conversations. Dad had been documenting everything. Octi12D asked for password to business account. I said no. She got angry. No 4K asked if I would sign house over to avoid taxes. I said no. And then, on the very last page, written in thick red marker, a note that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was dated 4 days before he died. They found the spare key to the file cabinet. I moved the originals, if I die, and they show you a paper with my name on it. Don't trust the copy. Look at the G in my signature. I changed it in 2020. Check the metadata. I stared at the note. Don't trust the copy. Denise had filed a copy of the will this morning. She hadn't filed the original because she likely created it on a computer yesterday. She didn't know about the signature change. She didn't know Dad had a tell. I pulled my phone out and called Elliot. I have the evidence, I said. And Denise just admitted to signing a deed yesterday. But Elliot, Dad left us a map. He changed his signature years ago to catch them. We need to pull the document she filed this morning and look at the letter G. If she forged his old signature, Elliot said, his voice rising with excitement. She just handed us the case. The clock is ticking. Elliot, I said, but I think we just stopped time. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in forensic accounting and the disintegration of a family unit. Judge Harrison had signed the temporary restraining order at 9 o'clock the morning after I visited the house. It was a sterile, legal way of saying, stop stealing. Denise was officially barred from selling, moving, or hiding any assets until the court could determine which will was valid. The locks she had changed were now keeping her inside a prison of her own making, unable to liquidate anything. But the real work wasn't happening in the courtroom yet. It was happening in a small conference room at Elliot Baines's office, where I sat across from a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a forensic accountant, a woman who looked like a kindly librarian but could track $1 through a hurricane. Numbers have a rhythm, Taylor, Sarah said, tapping a stylus against her tablet. Real expenses breathe. They go up and down. Groceries, utilities, gas, they fluctuate. Fraud is rhythmic. Fraud likes round numbers. Fraud likes patterns. We were looking at the bank statements for the joint account the one Mom claimed was drained by medical bills. We had subpoenaed them along with the credit card records. Look at this, Sarah said, highlighting a series of transactions from 18 months ago. Starting last January, there is a withdrawal of $500 cash from an ATM at the casino in the next county, every Friday, like clockwork. Dad didn't gamble, I said, frowning. He thought slot machines were a tax on people who couldn't do math. Exactly, Sarah said. Then look here. Best Buy. $3,000 for a high-end gaming PC, $2,000 for a home theater system, use of card online purchase, shipping address, Kyle's apartment. I felt a cold burn in my chest. They were using his credit card to furnish Kyle's life. It gets worse, Sarah said, swiping to the next page. Travel expenses, a weekend in Vegas, a trip to Miami, airline tickets for two, Denise Martin and Kyle Martin, paid for by Frank Martin's card. This was 6 months ago. Was your father traveling 6 months ago? He was in and out of the hospital, I said, my voice tight. He couldn't walk to the mailbox, let alone fly to Miami. So, while he was dying, they were vacationing on his dime, Sarah concluded. But here's the kicker, the LLC. She pulled up a payroll spreadsheet. My heart hammered. The LLC was supposed to be Dad's safe harbor. Kyle Martin is listed as a consultant for Martin Holdings. LLC, Sarah said. Salary $2,500 a month for the last 2 years. Kyle doesn't consult on anything, I said, incredulous. He doesn't even know what the LLC does. He thinks it holds debt. Well, he was drawing a salary, Sarah said, and since the LLC income was passive rent from the auto shop, dividends he was essentially siphoning off the profit before it could be reinvested. That is embezzlement. Taylor, if he wasn't performing work, it is wage theft and tax fraud. I stared at the numbers. They weren't just stealing. They were parasitic. They had attached themselves to the host, my father, and slowly drained him while smiling at the dinner table. There is one more thing, Sarah said, her voice dropping a little. A second mortgage application. She slid a document across the table. It was a home equity line of credit application, dated 3 months ago. It requested $50,000 against the equity of the house on Elm Street. The signature, I whispered. I looked at the bottom of the page. Frank Martin. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had taken of Dad's red notebook. The note about the letter G. Look at the G. I changed it in 2020. I zoomed in on the signature on the loan application. The G in living in the address line and the loop in the signature were long and sweeping. It was his old style, the style he used 5 years ago. It's a forgery, I said. He changed his handwriting. This is an old signature they traced or copied. If this loan went through, Sarah said, that is bank fraud, federal crime. It didn't go through, I said. Reading the stamp. Denied insufficient income verification. Thank God for banks being stingy. But they tried, Sarah said, and the intent matters. Just then, the door to the conference room opened. Elliot walked in, looking grim. We have a situation, he said. Denise and Kyle are in the lobby. They claim they want to talk settlement, and they brought a lawyer. I stood up. Let them in. A moment later, Denise swept in, wearing a pearl necklace and a look of tragic suffering. Kyle trailed behind her, looking sullen and hungover. Their lawyer was a guy named Peterson, a man known around town for handling DUIs and divorces, not complex probate litigation. This has gone far enough, Taylor, Denise announced, ignoring the forensic accountant. Freezing the assets. Really, I can't even buy groceries. You can use your own money. Mom, I said, sitting back down. Or maybe ask Kyle for some of that consulting fee he has been drawing. Kyle's head snapped up. What? We have the records. Kyle, I said, sliding the spreadsheet toward him. $2,500 a month. For what? What consulting did you do for the auto shop? Did you advise them on how to crash trucks? That was compensation, Kyle stammered, looking at his lawyer. Dad agreed to it. I was helping him manage the properties. Dad didn't agree to anything, I said, because Dad documented everything, and nowhere in his journals does he mention hiring you. In fact, he mentions specifically refusing to give you money. You are invading our privacy, Denise shouted. Frank wanted us to be taken care of. I am his wife. I kept this family together. You kept the family together by robbing him blind. I asked, The Vegas trip. The Miami trip. While he was in congestive heart failure. Denise's face crumbled. She burst into tears, loud, theatrical sobs. I needed a break. Caregiving is exhausting. You don't know. Taylor, you weren't there. I was drowning. I deserved a vacation. You deserved a vacation, I repeated. Did you ask him? Or did you just swipe the card while he was sleeping? He would have wanted me to go, she wailed. He loved me. He was terrified of you, I said coldly. I pulled out the copy of the loan application. Who signed this? Mom? The room went silent. Denise looked at the paper. Her tears stopped instantly. Her eyes darted to Kyle. I don't know, she said. It is dated 3 months ago, I said. Dad was lucid then. But the signature is wrong. It is a trace. Kyle handled the paperwork, Denise said quickly. What? Kyle looked at her, betrayed. You told me to fill it out. You said Dad was too shaky to hold the pen. I never said that, Denise shot back. I told you to ask him if you signed it. That is on you. You stood right there and watched me practice the signature on the kitchen table, Kyle shouted. You said, make sure the loops are big. That is how he does it. Shut up, Kyle, Denise hissed. No, you shut up. Kyle stood up, his face red. You are not pinning this on me. You needed the money to pay off the credit card before the statement came. You said if we got the loan, we could hide the Vegas charges. I sat there, watching them turn on each other. It was pathetic. It was inevitable. The alliance of thieves always fractures when the lights get turned on. So, I said, looking at their lawyer, Peterson, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. We have admission of forgery. We have admission of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. And we have the forensic trail of embezzlement. Now, Elliot stepped in, his voice calm and deadly. About that will you filed yesterday? Denise? Denise went pale. The one dated 3 weeks ago, Elliot continued. The one witnessed by, let me check your friend, Mrs. Higgins and Kyle. It is real, Denise whispered. He signed it. We checked the hospital logs for that day, Elliot said. Frank was in the ICU. He was heavily sedated. The nursing notes explicitly state patient confused, unable to follow commands. Elliot opened a folder. And more importantly, there is a note in his medical file from that very morning, a request Frank made to the social worker. He read from a photocopy. Patient requests that no legal documents be presented to him without his attorney present. Patient explicitly states, do not let my wife or son make me sign anything. I do not trust them. Denise sank into a chair. She looked small. The Grieving Widow Act was gone. The domineering matriarch was gone. She was just a woman who had been caught. I just wanted what was fair, she whispered. I put up with him for 40 years. His silence, his cheapness. I deserved the money. You deserved what he left you, I said, which was a comfortable life if you hadn't tried to steal it all first. I looked at Kyle. And you are going to pay back every cent of that salary to the estate, or I'm pressing charges. I don't have it, Kyle said, slumping. It's gone. Then you will sell your truck, I said. You will sell the gaming PC. You will sell whatever you have to sell. This is a family matter, Peterson tried to interject. Surely we can come to an arrangement without… No, I cut him off. This stopped being a family matter when they tried to defraud me at my father's funeral. This is a legal matter now. I turned to Elliot. File the motion for the signature verification on the will she submitted. I want the expert to testify. Taylor, please, Denise begged. Don't drag this into court. The shame. You should have thought about the shame when you handed me a check for $1,900 and told me that was all I was worth. I said. That was Kyle's idea, Denise cried. He said if we gave you cash, you would leave. She is lying, Kyle shouted. She wrote the check. She said, give her crumbs and she will think she is lucky. Get out, I said. Both of you. Get out of my lawyer's office. They scrambled up, bickering as they went, blaming each other, their voices echoing down the hallway. When the door closed, silence returned to the room. Sarah Jenkins let out a long sigh. "Well," she said, "that saves me about 10 hours of deposition time." "They just confessed to everything," Elliot said, shaking his head. "They are so used to manipulating you, Taylor, that they forgot how to act in front of people who require facts." "They thought they were the main characters," I said, staring at the empty chairs. "They forgot Dad was the author." "The hearing is in 2 days," Elliot said. "We have the forensic report, we have the hospital notes, we have the signature discrepancy, and now we have the verbal admissions of fraud." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Is it enough to stop them?" "It is enough to win the probate case," Elliot said, "but the criminal charges. That depends on how far you want to push it." I thought about Dad alone in that hospital bed, telling the nurse not to let his family near him with a pen. I thought about the fear in his eyes when he gave Gus the key. "I want the truth on the record," I said. "The next hearing isn't just about the will. Elliot, it is about clearing his name. They tried to paint him as confused and incompetent. I want the court to know he was the smartest person in the room until his last breath." "We can do that," Elliot said. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was setting again, another day gone, but for the first time since I arrived in Maple Hollow, I didn't feel the crushing weight of grief. I felt the cold, hard steel of justice. Dad had left me a mess, yes, but he had also left me the shovel, and I was finally digging us out. The invitation for peace talks came via Aunt Sarah. It was framed as a final attempt to salvage what was left of the family dignity before we dragged our dirty laundry into the public square of the county courthouse. Denise wanted to meet, not at her house, my house where she had changed the locks, but on neutral ground. Elliot Baines was skeptical. "Mediation works when both parties want a resolution," he told me as we adjusted our seatbelts in his car. "Your mother doesn't want a resolution, Taylor. She wants a capitulation. She wants you to kiss the ring." "I know," I said, staring out the window as the familiar suburban streets rolled by. "But I need to look her in the eye one more time. I need to hear her say it." "Say what?" "I need to hear her lie when she knows I know the truth." We pulled into Aunt Sarah's driveway at 7 in the evening. The house looked cozy, warm yellow light spilling from the windows, a stark contrast to the Cold War waiting inside. Aunt Sarah was Dad's younger sister, a woman who had spent her life trying to keep the peace between Frank's passivity and Denise's steamroller personality. Tonight, her living room was Switzerland. When we walked in, the air was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of potpourri and tension. Denise was sitting on the floral sofa, clutching a tissue, looking small and fragile. It was a pose I recognized instantly. It was the victim pose, designed to elicit sympathy from the gallery, in this case, Aunt Sarah, who hovered nervously by the kitchen doorway with a tray of cookies no one would eat. Kyle was pacing by the fireplace. He stopped when we entered, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Elliot. "We said family only," Kyle snapped. "Mr. Baines is my counsel," I said calmly, taking a seat in the wingback chair opposite them. "And since you brought a lawyer to the last meeting who helped you confess to bank fraud, I thought it was only fair I bring mine to witness whatever this is." Elliot sat beside me, placing his briefcase on the floor. He didn't open it. He just folded his hands and looked at them with that unnerving, unblinking stare. "Taylor," Denise began, her voice trembling. She reached out a hand across the coffee table, but I didn't take it. "Please, look at us. We are your family. Your father hasn't even been in the ground 3 days. Is this what you want?" "Lawyers, judges, police reports." "I didn't file the police report. Mom," I said. "I didn't change the locks, and I certainly didn't file a forged will." "It is not forged," she cried, looking at Aunt Sarah for backup. "Sarah, tell her Frank was confused at the end. But he knew what he wanted. He wanted me to be safe. He wanted the house to stay in the family." "The house is in the family," I said. "It's in the LLC, which belongs to me, which means it stays with us. You just don't like that I'm the one holding the keys." "You are going to kick me out," Denise wailed. "I know you are. You are vindictive. Taylor, you have always been jealous of the relationship I had with your father." I almost laughed. The relationship she had, the one where she silenced him. "I am not here to talk about my childhood trauma, Mom," I said, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "You called this meeting. What is the offer? Because if it is another waiver, we can leave right now." Kyle stepped forward. He looked tired. The arrogance from the funeral was gone, replaced by a jittery, frantic energy. He looked like a gambler who had bet the rent money and lost. "We can make this go away," Kyle said. "We scraped together some cash. We sold the boat. We borrowed from friends." He pulled an envelope out of his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. $12,000, Kyle said. "Cash, untraceable. You take it. You drop the contest. You sign a quitclaim on the LLC, and you go back to your life." I looked at the envelope. $12,000. 2 days ago. It was 1900, I said. Now it's 12,000. Inflation is moving fast in this house. "It is all we have," Denise sobbed. "We are bleeding dry." "Taylor, take it. It is a fortune. A fortune." I looked at Kyle. "You spent $3,000 on a gaming computer while Dad was dying. You spent $5,000 on a trip to Miami. 12,000 isn't a fortune. Kyle, it's barely a down payment on the restitution you owe the estate." "You are so greedy," Kyle spat. "You don't care about Dad. You just want the money." "If I wanted the money," I said, leaning forward, "I would let you go to jail for embezzlement and then take everything in the civil suit. I am here giving you a chance to come clean." "We have nothing to come clean about," Denise insisted, dabbing her eyes aggressively. "We are the victims here. You are the one harassing a widow." Elliot cleared his throat. The sound was soft, but it silenced the room instantly. "Mrs. Martin," Elliot said, his voice polite but steely, "let us discuss the document you filed with the court yesterday morning, the document you claim is Frank's will." Denise stiffened. "What about it?" "You stated under oath in your filing that this document was found in Frank's personal effects," Elliot said. "Where exactly?" "In his desk," Denise said quickly. "In the top drawer." "The top drawer?" Elliot repeated. "Was it in a folder, an envelope?" "It was in a blue folder," she said. "Right on top." "Interesting," I said. "Because I was in that office yesterday. The blue binder was gone. You said you didn't know where it was. You told me maybe Kyle took it to the dump." "I found it later," Denise snapped. "After you left with your police escort." "So you found the will after I left yesterday evening?" I asked. "But you filed it at 9 o'clock in the morning. How does that timeline work, Mom?" Denise froze. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit. "I meant I found it before. I was confused. I found it days ago." "Which is it?" Elliot asked. "Days ago or yesterday? Because perjury is a very specific crime. Mrs. Martin. It relies on details." "Stop grilling her," Kyle shouted. "She's upset." "I am asking a simple question," Elliot said. "Who witnessed Frank signing this document? The date on your filing says 3 weeks ago. Who was in the room?" "I was," Kyle said, puffing out his chest. "And Mrs. Higgins?" "Mrs. Higgins," Elliot said. "The neighbor?" "We spoke to Mrs. Higgins this afternoon." Denise's face went white. "She told my investigator that she hasn't been inside your house in 6 months because of her hip surgery," Elliot said. "She said she certainly didn't sign anything 3 weeks ago. She was very confused why her name would be on a legal document." "She's senile," Denise shrieked. "She forgot. She forgets everything." "And the notary?" Elliot asked. "The stamp on the page belongs to a Mr. Davidson. We called him too. He says his stamp was stolen from his car 2 months ago. He filed a police report." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a noose tightening. "You forged the signature," I said quietly. You stole a notary stamp, you faked the witnesses, and you filed it in court. I did what I had to do. Denise exploded. She stood up, her hands balling into fists at her sides. The tears were gone. The rage was back, pure and unfiltered. He wouldn't listen. He wouldn't sign. I sat there for hours, begging him. I told him, "Frank, just sign the paper. Protect us. Do it for Kyle." And he just stared at me. He just stared at the wall like I didn't exist. "So you signed it for him," I said. "I helped him," she screamed. It was what he should have done if he was in his right mind. He would have given me everything. I am his wife. I earned it. I scrubbed his floors. I cooked his meals. I am entitled to that house. "So you wrote the will yourself," Elliot said, his voice calm, locking the confession into place. "I took the old one," Denise yelled, pacing frantically now. "The one from 20 years ago. It was outdated. It didn't account for the new accounts. It didn't give Kyle enough. So I fixed it. I just fixed a few places to make it right, to make it match what the family needed." "You fixed it," I repeated. Kyle looked at his mother, his mouth slightly open. Even he, in his immense stupidity, realized what she had just done. She had admitted to altering a legal document. She had admitted to playing God with the estate. "Mom," Kyle whispered. "Shut up." "No," Denise turned on him. "I did this for you. I did this so you wouldn't be a loser your whole life. I risked everything to get that paper filed so you could have a house, and you are telling me to shut up." "You admitted to forgery," I said, "in front of 3 witnesses." I looked at Aunt Sarah. She was pressing her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her sister with horror. "Denise," Aunt Sarah whispered, "what have you done?" "I took charge," Denise shouted, panting heavily. "Someone had to. Frank was useless. He was checking out. I was the only one thinking about the future." "No, Mom," I said, standing up. "You were thinking about yourself. You couldn't stand that he had the final say. You couldn't stand that for once. You couldn't control the narrative." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't the waiver. It was the check. The check for $1,900. The blue ink was smudged where I had held it for 3 days. I walked over to the coffee table. I placed the check gently on top of the envelope containing Kyle's $12,000. "Here," I said. "What is this?" Denise asked, staring at the check like it was a bomb. "My full and final share," I said. "You keep it. You're going to need it for the legal defense fund." "Taylor, don't," Kyle pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, take the 12 grand. Just walk away. We can't go to jail. I can't go to jail." "Then you shouldn't have stolen from a dying man," I said. "He was my husband," Denise screamed. "It wasn't stealing. It was community property." "Not the way you did it," Elliot said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "We have the confession we needed. Thank you for the cookies. Sarah." I turned to walk out. Denise lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate, her nails digging into my skin. "You can't do this to me," she hissed, her eyes wild. "I am your mother. I gave you life." I looked down at her hand. I looked at the diamond ring she had bought with Dad's money while he was in the hospital. "You gave me life," I said, pulling my arm free with a sharp yank. "But Dad gave me the truth, and I'm choosing him." I walked out the front door, Elliot right behind me. We stepped into the cool night air. I could hear Denise screaming my name from inside the house, a muffled, ragged sound that faded as the heavy oak door slammed shut behind us. "She gave us everything," Elliot said as we walked to the car. "She couldn't help herself. Her ego wouldn't let her be wrong." "She thinks she fixed it," I said, looking up at the moon. "She really believes that lies are just a better version of the truth." "Well," Elliot said, opening the car door for me, "tomorrow, the judge is going to explain the difference." I got in the car. I didn't look back at the warm yellow windows of Aunt Sarah's house. I was done with mediation. I was done with keeping the peace. Dad had stayed silent for 40 years to keep the peace, and it had killed him. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. The 24 hours leading up to the probate hearing did not feel like the passage of time. It felt like the tightening of a noose. We were no longer just gathering information. We were assembling a weapon. The conference room at Elliot Baines's office had become a war room. The mahogany table buried under stacks of affidavits, bank records, and time-stamped security footage. Denise and Kyle had spent the last 2 days trying to control the narrative in the court of public opinion, crying to neighbors and posting vague, victim-blaming statuses on social media. But while they were busy playing to the audience, we were busy building the cage. The first major blow came from Sarah Jenkins, the forensic accountant. She walked into the room at 10 in the morning, holding a printout of the second mortgage application, the one with the forged signature that Denise had tried to blame on Kyle during our disastrous mediation. I cross-referenced the timestamp on the digital loan submission with Frank's medical records, Sarah said, slapping the paper down on the table. And, I asked, leaning forward, the application was digitally signed at 2:45 in the afternoon on October 12th. Sarah said. At exactly 2:45 that day, Frank Martin was not sitting at a computer. He was strapped to a table in the radiology department of Mercy Hospital, undergoing a nuclear stress test. His hands were literally taped down to keep him from moving. I stared at the timeline. It was physically impossible for Dad to have signed that document. We have the technician's log, Sarah added. They noted the start and stop time. Unless Frank telepathically logged into the bank portal while his heart was being shocked, this is definitive proof of identity theft. Add it to the pile, Elliot said, his pen scratching furiously against his legal pad. An hour later, the affidavit from Mr. Davidson, the notary whose stamp appeared on Denise's forged will, arrived via courier. Mr. Davidson was not a happy man. He was a stickler for rules, a man who took his seal seriously, and the idea that his name was being used to validate a crime had enraged him. Elliot read the sworn statement aloud. I, Thomas Davidson, state under penalty of perjury that I did not meet with Frank Martin on the date in question. Furthermore, on that date, I had already filed a police report regarding the theft of my notary seal from my vehicle. I have never witnessed a will for the Martin family, nor have I ever met Denise Martin. That destroys the validity of her filing on procedural grounds alone, I said. Even without the forgery, the witness is fake. It gets better, Elliot said. He turned his laptop screen toward me. We subpoenaed the security footage from the First National Bank. This is from 3 days before Frank died. I watched the grainy video. The timestamp read 11 in the morning. I saw my mother and Kyle standing at the teller counter. Denise was gesturing wildly, her face red even in the desaturated footage. Kyle was leaning over the counter, trying to look intimidating. They are trying to get into the safety deposit box, Elliot narrated. The teller is refusing them because their names aren't on the signature card. Look at Kyle, I pointed out, on the screen. My brother reached into his pocket and pulled out a cordless drill. It wasn't a threat of violence, he was literally asking if he could drill the lock. The teller recoiled. Security guards stepped into the frame a moment later, escorting them out. They were desperate, I whispered. They knew there was something in that box, or they just wanted to loot it before he died. It establishes intent, Elliot said. It shows they were actively trying to bypass legal protocols while Frank was still alive. It kills their grieving family defense. By noon, the pile of evidence was becoming a mountain. We had the hospital records proving Dad was incapacitated when the fake will was signed. We had the notary proving the stamp was stolen. We had the forensic accounting proving the embezzlement. But Denise wasn't going down without a fight. Around 1 in the afternoon, my phone blew up with notifications. A cousin sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post Denise had just made. It breaks my heart to say this, but my daughter Taylor has come home only to destroy her father's legacy. She has forged documents and is trying to kick her own mother out of the house. Please pray for us as we deal with this betrayal. The comments were filled with sympathy. So sorry, Denise. How ungrateful money changes people. She is claiming I forged the will, I said, showing the phone to Elliot. She is projecting. Let her talk, Elliot said calmly. Everything she says in public can be used against her. She is digging a hole. But people believe her, I said, feeling a spike of frustration. She is good at this. Elliot, she plays the victim so well. Facts don't care about Facebook likes, Elliot said, and we have one fact she can't spin. He pulled up a printed screenshot of a text message. It was the message Kyle had sent me 2 nights ago, right after they ambushed me at the motel. Kyle Martin, take $5,000. I can get it to you tonight. Cash. Just get in your car and drive. This is the best offer you are going to get. If the will Denise filed was real, Elliot said, tapping the paper, why would Kyle offer you $5,000 under the table to leave town? Why would he say, how much to stop, in the follow-up text? Because you don't bribe someone if you have the law on your side. I realized. Exactly, Elliot said. This text is an admission of guilt. It is an attempt to buy silence. No innocent beneficiary pays the executor to disappear. Just then, the receptionist buzzed the intercom. Mr. Baines, Mrs. Gable is here. I sat up straighter. Mrs. Gable was the neighbor Denise had smiled at during the funeral, the one she had blocked from seeing the check. She was a nosy woman, yes, but she saw everything that happened on Elm Street. Mrs. Gable walked in, clutching her purse, looking nervous but determined. I didn't want to get involved, she said, sitting in the chair Elliot offered. But I saw what she wrote on the internet about you forging things, and it just didn't sit right. Tell us what you saw, Mrs. Gable, Elliot said gently. It was about a month ago, she began. I was out watering my hydrangeas. Your porch is right across from my driveway. I heard shouting. Frank never shouted. He was a quiet man. She twisted her hands in her lap. I looked over. Denise was out on the porch with Frank. He was in his wheelchair. She was shoving a clipboard into his lap. She was yelling at him to pick up the pen. She grabbed his hand and tried to force it onto the paper. My stomach turned. Elder abuse, in broad daylight. What did Frank do? I asked softly. He slapped the clipboard away. Mrs. Gable said, it fell right off the porch, and he yelled, I will never forget it. He yelled, I am not dead yet. Denise, stop acting like I am dead. The room went silent. Did you see Kyle? Elliot asked. He was standing in the doorway. Mrs. Gable said, just watching, drinking a beer. He didn't lift a finger to help his father. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Elliot said. Will you be willing to testify to that in court tomorrow? If it stops her from telling lies about Frank, she said, straightening her hat. Yes, I will. When she left, I felt a heavy sadness settle over me. I had known it was bad, but hearing it described like that, my father fighting for his dignity on his own front porch, broke something inside me. It also hardened my resolve into something unbreakable. We have enough, I said. We have everything. Not quite, Elliot said. We have the witnesses. We have the paper trail. But Frank knew that might not be enough to sway a judge who sees family disputes every day. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity. Elliot reached into his drawer and pulled out a small, black USB drive. Frank gave me this the last time he came in to pay his retainer, Elliot said. He recorded it on his phone and asked me to keep a copy. He said, play this if they try to tell the court I wanted them to have it all. He plugged the drive into his laptop and clicked a file. The sound of static filled the room, followed by the familiar clearing of a throat. Then, my father's voice. It wasn't the weak, raspy voice from his final days. It was stronger, determined. My name is Frank Martin. Today is September 15th. I am making this recording because my wife, Denise, and my son, Kyle, have been pressuring me to change my will. They have threatened to put me in a home if I don't sign over the house. I covered my mouth with my hand. A home. They threatened him with a nursing home. I want to be clear, Dad's voice continued. I am leaving the majority of my estate, including the LLC, to my daughter, Taylor, not because I don't love my wife, but because I know she cannot handle the money. She will spend it, and she will let Kyle spend it, and in 5 years, there will be nothing left. There was a pause on the recording, a long, heavy sigh. If you are listening to this, it means they are fighting her. It means they are claiming I changed my mind. I did not. And if Taylor tells you that Denise handed her a check for a small amount, a few $1,000s, and told her it was her share, know that I predicted it. That is their game. They want to buy her cheap. Do not let them— The recording ended. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. He had spoken from the grave. He had called out the specific strategy, the check, the buyout months before it happened. He knew them so well. He knew exactly how they would try to erase me. That, Elliot said softly, is the nail in the coffin. Play it tomorrow, I said, wiping my eyes. I want everyone to hear it. I want Denise to hear his voice telling the world exactly who she is. As if summoned by the mention of her name. My phone began to ring. It was Denise. I looked at Elliot. He nodded. Answer it. Put it on speaker. But say nothing. I swiped the green button. Taylor. Her voice wasn't the screeching harpy from the mediation. It wasn't the confident matriarch from the funeral. It was high, thin, and terrified. Taylor, please, she said. I know you are with the lawyer. I know Mrs. Gable went to see you. She called me. She told me she is going to testify. I stayed silent. Baby, please, she cried. Don't do this. I am your mother. You can't send your mother to jail. Think about what people will say. Think about the family. I am thinking about the family, I thought, but I didn't say it. We can fix this, she rambled, her panic rising with every second of my silence. I will withdraw the filing. I will tear up the papers. You can have the house. Just don't play the tapes. Don't show the videos. Don't ruin me. Taylor, I am old. I have nowhere to go. Kyle left, she sobbed. He took his truck and left an hour ago. He said he isn't going to court. He left me alone. Taylor, I am all alone in this big house. Kyle had run. Of course he had. The rat was the first off the sinking ship. Taylor, are you there? Say something, please. Just tell me you won't let them arrest me. I looked at the phone. I looked at the evidence spread across the table. The forged signatures, the stolen notary stamp, the embezzlement spreadsheet, the check for $1,900. For 35 years, her voice had been the law. Her anger had been the threat that kept us all in line. She had ruled by fear, by guilt, by the manipulation of our love for Dad, and now she was just a frightened old woman begging for mercy she had never shown anyone else. I'll see you in court. Denise, I said. I didn't call her Mom. I hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. She knows, I said to Elliot. She knows it's over. She knows she has lost control, Elliot corrected. And for a narcissist, that is worse than jail. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting on the day before the hearing. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. The obligation to protect her from the consequences of her own actions was gone. Dad had given me the key, literally and metaphorically. He had given me the power to unlock the truth. Tomorrow, I said. We finish it. Tomorrow, Elliot agreed, closing the file on the desk with a definitive snap. We execute the will. The probate court of Maple Hollow was a room designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood paneling that absorbed the light, and an air conditioner that hummed with a low, menacing drone. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Elliot Baines. My hands were folded on the table, steady. Across the aisle, at the defendant's table, sat my mother. She had abandoned the black crepe of the grieving widow. Today, she wore a pale blue suit, a string of pearls, and an expression of bewildered innocence. She looked like a grandmother who had been wrongly accused of jaywalking, not a woman attempting to defraud an estate. Next to her, Kyle slumped in his chair. He had come back, presumably because his lawyer told him fleeing the state would only add flight risk to his list of problems. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at his cuticles, picking at them until they bled. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harrison swept into the room. He was a man with a face like carved granite and little patience for theatrics. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the rim of them at the two tables. "We are here regarding the estate of Frank Martin," Judge Harrison said, his voice booming without a microphone. "We have competing petitions, one for probate of a will dated September 3rd, filed by Mrs. Denise Martin, and a contest filed by Ms. Taylor Martin, presenting a will dated 3 years prior. Let's proceed." Denise's lawyer, Peterson, stood up. He looked nervous. He tugged at his collar. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of a daughter being unhappy with her father's final wishes. My client, the decedent's devoted wife of 40 years, presents a document that clearly outlines Mr. Martin's desire to keep the family home and assets within the immediate household. Ms. Martin, who has been estranged for years, has unfortunately been influenced to disrupt this process." Denise dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Right on cue. "She is being manipulated, Your Honor," she whispered loud enough for the back row to hear. "She doesn't mean it." Judge Harrison didn't look up from his file. "Mr. Baines." Elliot stood slowly. He didn't bluster. He didn't wave his arms. He simply picked up the heavy manila envelope containing the original will. "Your Honor, the document my client presents was drafted in my office, signed in my presence, and witnessed by 2 of my paralegals who are prepared to testify today. It contains a wet signature in blue ink. It was kept in a secure vault until 3 days ago." Elliot walked to the bench and handed the document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Furthermore," Elliot continued, "the document presented by the defense is fraught with irregularities that rise to the level of criminal fraud." "Objection," Peterson squeaked. "That is speculation." "Is it?" Judge Harrison asked. He was looking at the will Elliot had just handed him. He flipped the pages, checking the signature, the dates, the notary seal. "Mr. Baines, proceed." Elliot turned to the court. "We have submitted into evidence the sworn affidavit of Mr. Thomas Davidson, the notary whose stamp appears on the defense's document. Mr. Davidson confirms he never met Frank Martin and that his stamp was stolen 2 months prior to the date on that will." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Denise stiffened. "We have also submitted the hospital records from September 3rd, Elliot said, his voice gaining volume. "The day Mrs. Martin claims her husband signed this will in their kitchen, at that exact time, Frank Martin was in the ICU at Mercy Hospital, heavily sedated and physically unable to hold a pen." Judge Harrison looked at Peterson. "Counsel, do you have a response to the location of the decedent on the date of signing?" Peterson looked at Denise. Denise looked at the judge, her eyes wide. "He came home for a few hours," Denise stammered, standing up without permission. "The doctors let him come home for lunch. He signed it then." "Sit down, Mrs. Martin," Judge Harrison barked. Elliot didn't let up. "We have the hospital discharge logs. Your Honor, Frank Martin did not leave the facility, but we do have security footage from the First National Bank showing Mrs. Martin and her son attempting to drill into the decedent's safety deposit box 3 days before his death." The bailiff queued up the video on the large monitor to the side of the bench. The courtroom watched in silence as the grainy image of Kyle holding a power drill filled the screen. Kyle sank lower in his chair, practically sliding under the table. "And finally," Elliot said, turning to look directly at Denise, "we have the matter of the inducement." Elliot nodded to me. I stood up. I reached into my evidence folder and pulled out the photocopy of the check. The original was in my pocket, burning a hole there. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "At my father's funeral, standing directly in front of his casket, my mother handed me a check for $1,900. In the memo line, she wrote, 'Full and final share.' She presented me with a waiver to sign. attempting to coerce me into disclaiming my interest in the estate before I even knew a will existed. I handed the photocopy to the bailiff. Judge Harrison looked at the image. His eyebrows shot up. $1,900, he asked, looking at the asset list of the estate, which included a house, a business, and significant investments. She attempted to buy out a six-figure inheritance for $1,900. Yes, Your Honor, I said, and when I refused, they threatened me. They told me there was no will. They told me I would get nothing. It was a gift, Denise shouted, losing her composure. It was travel money. She is twisting everything. Mrs. Martin, Judge Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. I am looking at a document you filed with this court, a document that purports to be a legal will. You stated under oath that you found this in your husband's desk, yet the signature on this document does not match the signature on his driver's license, his passport, or the will provided by Mr. Baines. The judge held up the two documents side by side. Mr. Martin changed his signature style in 2020, the judge noted, looking at the forensic report Elliot had included. The signature on your document matches his style from 2015. It is a trace. Denise stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The innocent grandmother act was dissolving, revealing the desperate, cornered woman beneath. He wanted me to have it, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the bench. I am his wife. I am the one who suffered. She left. She doesn't deserve his money. This is not about what she deserves, Mrs. Martin, Judge Harrison said coldly. It is about what the law requires, and the law requires truth. He slammed his gavel down, a sound that cracked through the room like a gunshot. The petition for probate filed by Denise Martin is denied with prejudice, he ruled. The document is deemed invalid and fraudulent. The will presented by Taylor Martin is accepted as the true and last will and testament of Frank Martin. He looked at me. Ms. Martin, you are hereby appointed as the sole executor of the estate. You have full authority to secure all assets immediately. Then, he turned his gaze back to the defense table. It was a look of pure judicial disgust. Regarding the submitted document and the testimony heard today, Judge Harrison said, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into forgery, perjury, and attempted fraud on the court. Mrs. Martin, Mr. Kyle Martin, do not leave the jurisdiction. You can't do this, Denise shrieked. She lunged toward the railing. I am the widow. You can't treat me like a criminal. I built that life. It's mine. You are not a criminal because you are a widow. Mrs. Martin, Judge Harrison said, closing his file. You are a criminal because you broke the law. A wife does not have the right to rewrite history with a stolen pen. Court is adjourned. The bailiff moved toward Denise as she continued to scream, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Kyle didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the table, realizing that his free ride wasn't just over. It had crashed and burned. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The air felt cleaner here. Elliot followed me, a rare small smile on his face. That went well, he said. Better than well, I said. It's over. We were halfway to the elevator when footsteps came running up behind us. It was Kyle. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked. He looked younger than his 30 years, like a kid who had broken a window and was waiting for his allowance to be docked. Taylor. Wait, he panted. I stopped and turned around. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. Look, he said, wringing his hands. I didn't know she forged it. Okay, I knew she wrote it up, but I thought Dad agreed to it verbally. I was just doing what she told me. You know how she is. She pushes until you break. You were there, Kyle, I said. You held the drill at the bank. You signed the fake loan application. Don't pretend you were a bystander. I was scared, he pleaded. I have debts. Taylor, real debts. If I don't pay them, bad things happen. You have the LLC now. You have the money. Can't you just help me out? Just this once I'm your brother? Help you out? I repeated. Yeah, Just cut me a check. Doesn't have to be half, just enough to cover my debts. Then I'll disappear. I promise. You'll never see me again." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the same selfishness that lived in Denise. He wasn't sorry for what he did to Dad. He wasn't sorry for trying to cheat me. He was only sorry he got caught. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought we were playing by the old rules, where he screwed up and the family bailed him out. "I am helping you, Kyle," I said. He brightened. "You are yes," I said. "I am teaching you the most valuable lesson you will ever learn. Actions have consequences." His face fell. "Taylor, please. They are going to prosecute us. Mom is old. She can't go to jail." "She should have thought about that before she stood in front of a judge and lied," I said. "And as for your debts, you have a truck. You have a gaming computer. You have hands that can work. Figure it out." "You are taking everything from us," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You are leaving us with nothing." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the original check. The blue paper was wrinkled and soft. $1,900, full and final share. I held it up between us. "I'm not taking anything from you, Kyle," I said calmly. "I am just taking back what you stole." I looked at the check one last time. It was a symbol of everything they thought I was worth. It was the price tag they put on my love, my loyalty, and my grief. With a slow, deliberate motion, I ripped the check down the middle. R.I.P. Then I stacked the halves and ripped them again. R.I.P. I opened my hand and let the blue confetti flutter to the courthouse floor. "There," I said. "Now the account is closed." I turned my back on him. I heard him calling my name, shouting insults, begging, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from a radio station I used to listen to, but had finally turned off. I walked out of the courthouse doors and into the bright, blinding sunlight of noon. The air smelled of autumn leaves and rain. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. Dad was gone. The house would be sold. The money would be managed properly. But the real inheritance wasn't the LLC or the investments. The real inheritance was this moment. The moment I walked to my car, got in, and drove away from Maple Hollow. Not as a victim, not as the good daughter who did what she was told, but as a woman who had faced the monsters under her bed and evicted them. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute? At the gym? Or maybe relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.